Hello and welcome to Booster Pack Throwback. My name is Rands, and this is the show on the Booster Pack Network where we can unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible card game history. And today, of course, we're going to be doing just that with one of the most enduring and loved classic collectible card games of all time, and one that innovated in a multitude of ways. One of its key innovations, though, was it was not a game that could actually be based on something that pre-existed. It was an original franchise or property when the CCG launched. That meant it wasn't based on a pre-existing game, a pre-existing TV show, or even a pre-existing movie like many of its contemporary collectible games. It was a wholly unique thing, and this meant that it could put its story, its characters, and its setting right at the forefront of its very own brand and offer players one of the most epic and legendary stories ever told in collectible gaming history. One that was threaded throughout numerous chapters in rule books, on online posts, and even on the fragments of flavor text on the hundreds and then eventually thousands of cards themselves. The game I am talking about, of course, is the Legend of the Five Rings collectible card game, and today we are lucky enough to be joined by somebody who can shed a light on the origin of that game and some of the innovations I've just mentioned and that story as well. Yes, our guest today is hobby gaming's most enduring storyteller and a prolific role-playing game designer. Over the years, they have offered gaming's world a number of independent RPGs that they've created from their very own mind, including things like Cat, Orc World, and Houses of the Blooded. However, it is their giant RPG worlds, one being Legend of the Five Rings and the other being 7th Sea, that their name is going to be branded in the minds of enthusiasts for RPGs and hobby gamers for all time. I am absolutely honored to be able to say the following words. Welcome to Booster Pack Throwback, the multi-Origin Award winner, John Wick. John, how do you do, bud?
Oh, not too bad. Thank you for that very suspiciously generous introduction. Just kind of hanging out and just working on lots of side projects. My main job at Chaosium, which is the 7th Sea product, and playing a lot of Xbox with my brother.
Awesome. It sounds like our lives aren't too dissimilar then, except for the role-playing game work. So let me ask you, I'm going to be the first to admit, I don't know everything about Legend of the Five Rings immersive story that went on for decades and decades. Obviously, I know a lot about it, but I wanted to dig into it with you today. And there's so much I want to find out about your time sort of crafting it, because it has gone down in collectible games history as one of the most enduring stories and one of the most iconic and interesting ways to sort of tell a collectible card game story. But what I want to do first, though, is I want to get to know how you sort of discovered gaming, what you sort of found about gaming that you latched onto, and when you really started to gravitate towards this as a hobby.
Well, this is I've told this story many times. I originally had, when in 1981, I walked into a Spencer's Gifts, which is totally dates me, but that's fine, with $10 that I got for mowing lawns, and I found the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Wow, that's threads to back to Chaosium.
Yep. And Chaosium was my first, Call of Cthulhu was my first role-playing game. And since then, after that, I took that little card that came in the box and I ordered Stormbringer and Pendragon. So all of my formative role-playing game stuff all comes from Chaosium and from Greg Stafford and Lynn Willis and Ken St. Andre and other people who were, working for Chaosium at the time.
Well, that's so fascinating, because I've had quite a few people who came into the hobby through role-playing, of course, and almost every other story starts with Dungeons and Dragons. So you had such a unique sort of an interesting and innovative sort of way to sort of look at hobby gaming and hobby role-playing, or fantasy role-playing, as many called it then, that wasn't the same as everybody else's.
I think your first role-playing game kind of tells you what role-playing games are. And you can change that, right? You can change your mind about things, but for me, I did not grow up on classes, and I didn't grow up on a game that essentially is D&D teaches you that the world is a nail and you have a hammer, and the only way to solve problems is to kill them.
Yeah, hammer them into the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And so starting with Call of Cthulhu and then moving on to Pendragon, which is the perfect role-playing game, and moving on to Stormbringer and other Chaosium games really informed me about what role-playing games are, could be, and things that they shouldn't try to do.
That's awesome. Well, those games are so much more, not to say that D&D isn't, but story based. Like that, it's a very mechanical game, D&D, but those games are very like almost collective storytelling, and it's sort of to me sort of seems like this is a very easy thread to draw between things like the worlds that you've built so far, like Legend of the Five Rings and Seventh Sea and everything like that. But let's put a pin in that while we catch up with ourselves. Tell me about how that passion leads to professionally into entering the gaming industry.
Well, I was at a convention in Los Angeles. I was living in Los Angeles, and DJ Trindle, who is the editor of Shadis magazine, was there. And I met DJ and I said, "Hey, I want to write for Shadis magazine." And he said, "Okay, here's our submission, sheet, and here are our rates and everything." And I wrote an editorial piece, not a thing, but an editorial piece called "Shakespeare Didn't Need Dice," which was about diceless role playing and things like that. And DJ was impressed enough with it that he went to the owners and said, "We have to get this guy on board." And so it was really DJ who got me involved. And so I started working for Shadis magazine, which was published by AEG at the time. And I'm credited in the magazine as pinch hitter because DJ would come to me and go, "We need an article about this," and I would write it. And so I had like 17 different pseudonyms that I would write under. So yeah, and so it was a lot of fun. And then AEG Dave Williams, who was doing all of the collectible card game stuff, because it was during the big boom, the big collectible card game boom. So Shadis was, covering Magic and other things. And Dave showed me the very, very basics of what would become the Legend of the Five Rings card game. At the time, it was the Bushido card game. And Bushido is a role-playing game by FGU, Fantasy Games Unlimited, and the owners, John Zinzer and Dave C., were big fans of the Bushido role-playing game, and they wanted to make a samurai-inspired, Chanabra-inspired collectible card game. And it was at the very beginning, and we really didn't have like a lot of details mapped out. And when I became part of the design team, I was kind of like the cultural advisor, because I had read, Sun Tzu and Gorin no Sho and and other stuff, and I was very familiar with Chanabra as a style of as a movie genre,
which is essentially like the Kurosawa's the samurai films and stuff for those.
Yeah, sword films. It's Chanabra. It means sword film, and so I was a big fan of those. And so when it came time to making characters and things, essentially the characters were Lion Clan Samurai A, Lion Clan Samurai B.
Just placeholder names.
It's just placeholder names, and I would take a look at the effect, and then what I did was I developed families for each of the clans and gave each family a kind of theme. So this is the political family, this is the fighting family, this is the magic family. So if you had a Lion Clan Shugenja, they would come from the Asahina family. And so that gave them the family name, and then I would give them a whatever first name. And then I would write the flavor text for all of the cards. And then we had this big meeting. It was me, Matt Wilson, Matt Strosik, Dave Williams, and I. And we kind of like blueprinted out a story arc. And what that came from was the idea that, and we all approached John Zinzer about it, of what we should really do is we should tell a story over the course of the base game and 5 expansions. And then when the story is over, the game is over. That's it. You have the full set now.
So I was going to say, so before we jump into like really like the depths of what happened there in those years at AEG when you guys were sort of first crafting the collectible card game for Legend of the Five Rings, and I'm absolutely fascinated to hear that you sort of extrapolated story and narrative out of the mechanics. Like game designers would call that bottom up design. You took the mechanics and then crafted a story about what made sense with it. I'm sort of wondering though, like before that, I mean, this is about 94, 95 by my best guess. So Magic had been in the market for a couple of years now, and obviously was the inspiration for wanting to explore AEG, wanting to explore a collectible card game. Did you have any experience with a collectible card game? What was your opinion of them when they first launched prior to, getting into this sort of gritty design work on Legend of the Five Rings?
I played Magic, but I didn't like it because I don't like playing a game backwards.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, now they call it they call it the chain. Is that what they call it?
Oh, the stack.
The stack. Yeah, you play cards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you resolve them 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes, which is conspicuously absent from Legend of the Five Rings, so I understand that.
Conspicuously absent, yeah. So I don't like playing games backwards. It's not something I'm good at, so it's not going to be something that I enjoy. I was a fan, however, of the Over the Edge card, or the On the Edge card game.
Oh yeah, based on Over the Edge by Jonathan Tweet.
Which also inspired the idea. It sparked the idea in me because they were doing expansions, and in the expansions they would have different versions of characters that were in the previous expansion, showing that time was moving and characters are changing.
Oh wow, yeah. So they would have such and such like Sully, Sully the bartender. The next episode, next set it would be like Sully the the pilot or something like that.
Exactly. So I was really inspired by that, and I said, let's take this to 11. And that was really like one of the battle cries of the AEG design team at the time was take it to 11.
Press the thumb.
So with that in mind, we took that idea of characters changing and went, let's have them change over this course of a story. And we can even have narrative arcs where some characters become more powerful and some characters become less powerful, right? Because they're going through an arc, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. So that would what would lead to sort of experienced versions of various characters is what you're saying. And that was directly influenced by the On the Edge collectible card game.
Yep. I was a big fan. I'm still a big fan of Over the Edge. It's one of the best role-playing games of all time.
It is an absolute wild game. I recommend anyone check it out. It's like a like a William Burroughs type RPG that was just off the wall. Or over the edge, I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yep, that's exactly right. The other game that Dave and I were big fans of was the Jihad game, which has become Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, right? We were big fans of the game mainly because it was a multiplayer game. You could play it with more than two people, and because of the timing rules. We were really fond of the fact of I play a card and it happens. Done. Now I play another card and it happens. Done. And I play this card and you say I have a reaction to that card, and then you play the reaction, and then there is like in that game when we were designing L5R, Dave and I were very much, we should have like only one card that reacts to a reaction, and because there's only one, the idea is like everybody will be waiting for it. Is it there? Does he have it? Right?
Yeah.
And so, but we were really big fans of that timing system, and that was the timing system that we adopted into L5R. But I want to go back really quick to the idea that a complete set.
Oh yeah, the complete narrative. It was all in sort of 5, 6 sets. Yeah.
One of the things it accomplishes is it tells the whole story. It gives you a sense of completeness because you have the complete set. But more importantly, it doesn't mean we can't tell stories in Rokugan anymore, right? In the land of Legend of the Five Rings. It just means we have to tell a different story. And that was what I was really excited about, because my pitch after L5R, and I talked about this all the time, I was like, once the story's done, because players would actually challenge me. They would go, you're not really like ending the game. And I was like, yeah, it's going to allow us to do this. It's going to allow us to like reconfigure the rules, because after 2 years of doing this, we'll know the rules set a lot better than when we started, so we can reconfigure the rules into a new game and make it a better game because we've learned from it, right? All that kind of stuff. And my idea was to do Rokugan 2000, which was a cyberpunk Rokugan with the clans still in charge, and you still have katanas, but you also have, Uzis and motorbike gangs, and all the kind of Neo Tokyo kind of stuff that was going on at the time in the 90s. And that was my idea. That was my pitch, at least for that. But yeah, that was the whole idea behind the closed set. And so when I was at Gen Con, when the decision, because actually that's kind of jumping ahead, but there was a time at which Legend of the Five Rings was bought by WotC. But we were still the design team, and that was part of the agreement, was they'd buy it, but we would be the design team. And the management at WotC said, we are continuing this game. And I was in this very small room. It was almost like a closet. I was in a very small room at Gen Con at the Day of Thunder when they went, we are continuing this game.
There's some interesting timeline stuff there. I know John told the story of how he and Ryan sort of came to the decision to continue the game after it was advertised. Essentially, when it was first launched, it was like the first ever collectible card game with an end. It had that, you could almost hear the thunder on that tagline, like with an end, da da da. And it was really fascinating. I do want to jump into that, especially that tail end where the Day of Thunder sort of comes into it. But let's roll back a little bit. Let's sort of marinate in that sort of pre-release sort of time a little bit. Tell me a little bit about obviously your role in the game's creation. You sort of took on the role as sort of like the narrative czar of the game itself. You sort of directed the story, you sort of came up with these characters, you sort of evolved this sort of world outside of the mechanics of the game itself. But can you sort of recall, speaking to the mechanics before that we were talking about with timing and everything like that, can you sort of recall, you got brought into the project, as it had sort of kickstarted, no pun intended on the word Kickstarter, but as it sort of went forward and sort of got its momentum, do you remember how the game changed mechanically? Like, was it always going to be a fight over these provinces, or was it something else entirely?
No, originally it was going to be a duel, you and another samurai. And the game is about prepping for the duel and then fighting.
Right. So it would be like a 2-act story, basically, the sort of ramp up and then the climax.
It just didn't work out. And so that's when the idea was to shift it into clan warfare. And a lot of that comes from the idea that so one of the earlier games I was very fond of was RuneQuest, which has characters. It's, in my opinion, RuneQuest is the first role-playing game, not Dungeons and Dragons. RuneQuest is the first role-playing game because it's the first game where it has rules about what your character believes.
Oh, right. So you're embodying a role rather than embodying, X person who is doing, mechanical stuff.
And so your religion is incredibly important in the game. And, the gods don't all get along. So I don't think I trust you, Orlanthe. I'm not sure if I trust you. And so I was really inspired by that element of the game, is that characters wore their beliefs on their sleeves. And it became very important to me as a game master. It's like, what does your character believe? And so when it came to designing the clans, when we decided not to do the dueling thing and instead do clans, it was really important for me to go, okay, what do the clans believe? And so looking at all of them by pure luck, it was very easy to see that each of the clans kind of fit one of the disciplines or one of the elements of Bushido. So this clan was about loyalty. This clan was about courage. This clan was about, all the way around. And so what I like to say is that the clans all interpret Bushido differently, but they're all right.
Right. Okay.
And so we kind of like, once we had that theme for each of the clans, then the clan started to take real character. And then it became really easy to go, this mechanic will fit into the lion. This mechanic will fit into the scorpion. This mechanic will fit into the crane. It became very easy to do that. And the other thing is that in those early days, although there were people who were in charge of certain things, I was in charge of story, Matt Wilson is in charge of art, Dave Williams was in charge of mechanics. Dave had a whiteboard on his wall in his office, which was his idea board. And you would come in and go, I'm going to write this an idea for a card. I had an idea for a card, and I write it down. At the end of the day, Dave typed them all up and erased it, and there's a new board every day. And the same thing was with me. People would come to me and say, hey, what do you think of, this happening in the story? And I go, I will write that down. And so there was this very open, a very open environment to talk to each other. And I learned a lot about game design from Dave Williams. Dave Williams is one of the best game designers I know. He's just really, really smart and very good at it.
So for the audience who may not remember at the moment, Dave is obviously sort of the game design genius behind those sort of early years at AEG. Obviously, things like Legend of the Five Rings, the subsequent, I think he was obviously doing things like Doomtown when that came out, and a couple of those sort of games in those early sort of years. I think he might have helped on he might have helped on Seventh Sea. I don't know if he was specifically credited as designer, but he might have helped on that collectible card game.
Yeah, he did help on Seventh Sea. The main designer was Dan Verson.
Yeah.
But so at the time there was this big, it really felt like we were really had an open environment, and we could talk to each other and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I think really helped the first edition of the first iteration of the game. It was that whole thing. It was a collaborative process, even though I was in charge of story, Dave was in charge of mechanics, things like that. It really was a collaborative process.
Yeah, so I did want to ask, speaking to that collaborative process, it's interesting because when you put it in the context of other collectible card games, Legend of the Five Rings is sort of the first one to really embrace story, and especially as one as an original IP. You had Magic the Gathering come out, and it was an IP, but essentially it wasn't really treating its story as much of anything more than Shakespeare quotes or, pull quotes from H.P. Lovecraft books or something like that as far as flavor text goes. And it's interesting to speak to that because I know Wizards was operating in two separate places at that time. One was in Philadelphia, one was over in Seattle there. You guys were all together there in California and were able to have that crosstalk and that collaboration and sort of hone and bring something in together sort of collectively. Do you think that that's part of the reason why this game launched with such a focus on story to sort of buck the trends of other things that were happening in the collectible game market at the time?
Well, yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with me wanting to have more, have the game tell a story, because my background at the time, I had done a lot of professional storytelling. My whole GM style was based on less mechanics and more storytelling and all that. And the other guys, eagerness to essentially do the same thing, to do something that hadn't been done. It was one of the reasons that we wanted to do samurai drama, was because we felt like it hadn't really been done well in the industry before. And we wanted to do that. And so a lot of that also comes from the, let's do something that no one's done. That kind of spirit was in everybody. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we did so many things that you look at them now, it's kind of like Citizen Kane. I'm not comparing myself to Orson Welles, but it's kind of like, you look at a game mechanic now and you're like, oh, it's such a cool mechanic. And I've been in the industry for 25 years. And I said, yeah, I saw that in 1997.
Yeah, you were definitely breaking ground in some way, regardless of how it was put together and stuff. So that makes me really curious because, collectible, as somebody who was coming from sort of a more, collaborative storytelling effort, you were crafting these stories for role-playing games. When it comes to creating a story for a collectible card game, that is a incrementally more difficult task because the primary way that your audience is engaging with that story is through things like flavor text on cards, and you don't have any control over which card they see first. It's not like you can set up a story on a common card that they're going to get in one pack and then sort of have that smoothly execute on an uncommon or rare card six packs later. You don't really have control over that. How did you find sort of crafting a story cohesively in a world cohesively for something like a game that gets distributed in this sort of randomized model?
By not doing a cohesive story.
Right, right. Okay, so unpack that for me. Tell me about how you approach that as not doing a cohesive story, and what experience did you draw from that?
I'm a big fan of Ken Burns, the documentary maker. And I was very affected by his Civil War series. And one of the things that I loved about the Civil War series is that it's all letters. And so it's kind of, and if you read the books that it's based on, if you read the Shelby Foote books that it's based on, it is an oral tradition. It's a oral history. It's not a, fact. It's told from the point of view of people who were there. And so it's like, was there a battle of Gettysburg? Yes. What was it like? Well, let's talk to this guy, someone who was there. And now let's talk to this guy who was on the other side. And now let's talk to this guy who was a journalist who was observing it. Right. And so you get all of these different viewpoints. And from that, you can kind of get a picture of it. So when I was thinking about flavor text, I was like, when we tell the story of a battle, we can have the flavor text from all these different characters who were at the battle, but their subjective points of view. And that way, much like doing horror, you don't want to show the horror, you want to hint at the horror and then have the viewer or the reader fill in the blanks. I wanted the players to fill in the blanks. And what's more, I did not want a canonical version of the story. So I may have ideas in my head about, what happened, but those are unimportant. And a lot of that comes from role-playing games too, because the whole idea of I'll use RuneQuest again. The world in RuneQuest is called Glorantha, and the guy who designed it, Greg Stafford, had a kind of rule, which was your Glorantha may vary. And the idea was there is no canon for Glorantha. It's everybody's, whenever in every game, your Glorantha is going to be different from other people's. And that's a feature, not a bug. And so I took that to heart and I went, okay, let's have a Rokugan that is completely subjective. Let's have an event that is told through the eyes of the characters, and there is no objective, like here's the canon. Because to me, canon is actually kind of like the death of storytelling. This especially now, like the almost religious reverence of canon. And I'm like, yeah, consistency is good. Consistency is important, right? But consistency isn't the sacred holy. I mean, that word comes from the Catholic Church. It is a religious word, right? So to me, consistency was more important than canon, and it gave the players something to talk about. Because in 1995, the World Wide Web had just launched. I remember going into Matt Sorosik's office and him pointing at the computer going, this is called the World Wide Web and we have to use it.
Right. Yep.
The Legend of the Five Rings, L5R.com was one of the first websites. And we used that as a way for players to communicate with each other from all over the country and even in different countries. While, people would go, John, what's the real story behind this? And I'm like, what do you have?
And just to speak to your point before, obviously there's two things I want to say. Like you said, the same way that the story was interpreted through the characters differently, it is similar to the way that you said that you wanted them to interpret the sort of the tenets of Bushido as well. You wanted them to interpret this particular system and sort of then reinterpret it their own way for each clan. And the other way I relate to this story as well is, I've had plenty of people on this podcast sharing their own histories, and sometimes they don't line up with other people's, you know what I mean? It's just part of the great storytelling and the histories of the world that we live in.
I completely agree. It's a fun storytelling technique. And then and that was what I employed. I wanted ambiguity. I wanted contradictions. I wanted, this card says this happened and this card said this happened. John, what really happened? I'm like, well, that's what this character believes and that's what this character believes. So, figure it out. And, some players loved it and some players shook their fist at me.
And that's what they always say, right? Like, you want to, a reaction is really the critique, right? Whether it's a good reaction or a bad reaction, a reaction means that you've stirred something within them and they're passionate about it. And L5R obviously has some of the most passionate players, if not the most passionate players in all of collectible gaming.
And again, that's a feature, not a bug. And I mean, when someone comes up to you and shows you a tattoo, right, of something that you did, they show me their Lion Clan tattoo or their Crane or whatever, you're like, man, that is a humbling experience.
They're literally taking your story to the grave.
Yeah, literally. And I think, one of the reasons that worked was because we told the players to wear your clan on your sleeve. Like, this is my thing. And that was the other part of it was the story tournaments. Was the idea that each tournament had an event in the war, and the winner would determine the outcome of the event. And, that was, again, one of the things that I suggest is, like, when we do tournaments, let's make it matter. Let's make it really count. And that's the reason that, at the Day of Thunder, at the end of the story, there were 300 people surrounding the AEG booth, waiting to hear how the story ends.
Absolutely. So I do want to jump into the Day of Thunder, but I feel like we should give that its sort of breathing room and sort of talk about that then. Because at the same time, you're sort of creating this sort of this sort of fractured story through all these different cards, through different means and stuff like that, through whether, I mentioned it in the introduction, sometimes there was stories told in rule books, sometimes there was just posts online from somebody from AEG just going, here's some more story or something like that. Tell me about how did that sort of consolidate? Like, were you guys always looking to, like, also break this into a more cohesive world with the role-playing game as well? Like, how does that sort of wedge into where you guys are creating this narrative story when it comes to the Legend of the Five Rings, sort of, to use the word again, canon?
The idea, well, we knew that we wanted to make a role-playing game. And so with that in mind, the idea of like each of the clans being its own niche, and then each of the families being a niche within that. So, like, when we did the role-playing game, if you are a Lion Clan samurai, you can be from one of four families: the fighting family, the political family, the magic family, and then the super specific clan family. It's like, this is the unique thing that nobody else has.
These are the fundamentalists.
Yeah, exactly. But it was also like this, for the Scorpion clan, it was the spy family, right? But for the Lion Clan family, it was the historian family. And then for the Crane, or for the the Phoenix clan, so each of the clans had its own, like, this is unique to us. And the card game really informed a lot of that. And then it also, like, informed, when do you put the game? Because in the timeline of the game, where do you set it? Do you set it after the story or before the story? And we had a lot of discussions about that too.
Well, it's so interesting. Like, you brought that sort of role-playing game philosophy into this collectible card game world, which hadn't happened before. It's another one of those innovations. And like you said, there wasn't just people who had tattoos. They were literally wearing their colors. They were wearing, Japanese garb. They had, like, costume katanas and stuff like that at the events. Like, what was it like seeing those sort of people embrace the stories that you would lay down throughout these games like that? Tell me, like, I mean, I've heard stories so far, like, shared on this show, there was a tournament where two players were playing, this is a little bit later, but, like, Naga, and, like, they refused to let anybody watch their match, so they went and did it in another room because, the story had been crafted about, they settled their differences outside of the kingdom or whatever. And this is how these players embraced it and came back. And, one guy turned around and said, I was the winner, and we didn't tell anything else more of that story because they were so engaged. They embraced this game as a sort of collectible card game, but through a role-playing game experience, to speak to what you were talking about before. How did that make you feel? Like, obviously, it's a huge accomplishment. And what are some other stories that you remember from that sort of behavior?
Well, I remember the Naga story because the two players said, "No, Naga, don't fight." And we're like, "Well, one of you has to win." And then they were like, "Is there any way that we can do?" Like, "Well, one of you has to win." And they went, and that was when they went, "Yes, then we will go over here away from everybody else, and we will determine the winner." And as far as I know, they did rock paper scissors. As far as I know, right? And I would be like, "That's great. I think that's fantastic." And then there was the LA tournament that my friend Steve Swarner won with his Muhammad Ali deck. And this is a great moment. This is an important moment in a lot of ways, was that LA tournament. Because Steve came in with a deck that did something that no one else had figured out yet. Essentially, it allowed him to because he's like, "Oh, I can declare a battle here and then send nobody. And then I will play a card here that allows me to move people into, and then I will put all my people over here in this fourth province, but I will play intersecting highways, and move all my people to the place that you aren't."
So like a sneak attack.
It was an amazing deck. And I remember I was standing with Dave Williams and he was looking over it. And I can't remember if I said, or I think someone else said, "Well, what's it like to watch your game grow up?" Because everybody was like, "How the hell do you beat this deck?" And then what happened is that Steve knew that the cards that you brought out during a story tournament would influence the story. And so he brought out, when he knew he was going to win, he had been holding, been keeping the card in the province. He brought out the Lion Clan champion. Because he was like, "John, I'm bringing out Lion Clan champion." And the other player turned back the Lion Clan champion with the Imperial favor. And so that is where the idea that the super corrupt, evil possessed emperor, commanded the Lion Clan champion to back down. And because she's the champion of the Lion Clan, she has to obey the emperor, even though she knows the emperor is super evil and corrupt. But that's her duty as a samurai. So she retreated in the face of combat and everything like that. And then after that, I was like, "Okay, this is the story I want to do from that." And we had a big meeting. I said, "This is the story I want to do. I want to say that the Lion Clan champion commits seppuku."
Wow. Which is samurai suicide, basically.
Yeah. And Dave Williams, the Lion Clan fanboy, I can call him that because I'm the Scorpion Clan fanboy. He raised his voice, he put his fist down on the table, and he went, "No, you cannot do that. If you do that, that will kill the Lion Clan. That will kill the Lion Clan, and the fans will, at least half the fans will hate us, blah, 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 blah." And he gave this super impassioned, very impassioned speech. And John Zinser said, "That's exactly the reason we should do it."
Well, I mean, let's unpack that because we haven't really jumped into it yet. But, I mentioned innovation in the introduction and storytelling as well. And those two things are interweaved by what we're talking about here. You've got these tournaments that are actually shaping the way that the world is being crafted at the same time by you. Tell me about, obviously, that's a fantastic experience and an amazing story. But tell me about, you wouldn't be able to work ahead then. You would have to basically just be waiting for the next tournament so that you could start to craft a story. What impact did that have on you as a storyteller?
Well, fortunately, I'd also done theater and learned improv skills. So it was a lot of, as a game master, I do game master seminars, and in my Play Dirty book, which is my game master techniques to make your players love to hate you. The whole idea of, you don't have plans when you're a GM. You have contingencies, because you can spend 8 hours coming up with this story that you want the players to be involved with, and they'll just take a left turn and go over there. right? And you're like, oh, but the story over here, and they're like, no, we want to do this. We saw this thing on the map, and we think it's cool, and we want to go there. And so I learned, not very quickly, but I learned, like, don't do that. Don't have a plan, and just have the illusion of a plan. And so when the player, learn how to improvise, learn how to say yes and, learn to listen to the players and about the things they want, and then you react to that. GMing is not about leading people. What I told, I was on a YouTube channel, and I said the GM's job is not to tell the players a story. It's to help the players tell their characters' stories. And so, whenever you see, there's a lot of YouTube DMs out there who are like, this is my grand story. And I don't care about your grand story. I'm interested in the characters' stories and where those go. So a lot of that came into the story tournaments. A lot of that was, okay, what happened here? What cards were played? When somebody went, oh, because, that's in a tournament, right? People go, oh my God, because you have that's important too. Dave Williams made sure that in every set that we did, there was a holy shit card. There is a card that if you play it, the rest of the table will exclaim something exclaim something.
Yeah, I've heard other games call them marquee cards or something like that. Something where it's like, you need a face card for the set, that just has an effect that's never happened before.
Yep. And it's something that, that players are looking for. Like, does he have it? Does he have it? Does he have it? What? All right, And so whenever that happened at a tournament, I went there and I was like, okay, what happened? Right. And then you incorporate that into the story. Now, does the story have a general arc? Yes. Did we know who was going to win? No. And that was important. It was very important to listen to the players, incorporate that into the next set of cards flavor text, and then let them and let them look at that and go, I remember that. This is the big one. I was there when that happened.
Right. You were a part of the story.
You were a part of the story. And that's like, people ask me, why are L5R fans so crazy? It's because they are part of the story. And like my deck, I was there, and Steve Sorner will tell you, I killed the Lion Clan champion. And he will be sad about it. And at the same time, he was like, he was really cool.
It's an event in their life. Like if you play a counter spell on somebody's, fireball in Magic, that's just another game. But what you've crafted there is an experience. And what I'm really fascinated by, I've always sort of said that Legend of the Five Rings, in its initial inception in that sort of 90s era, brought role-playing to collectible card games. And I didn't really realize the extent to which that is true, because you sort of sitting, as a spectator to the players being, your people you're playing this giant role-playing game with, you were sort of crafting that. Like we think of these story tournaments as being these sort of moments where it's like, oh, okay, such and such won, so that means we move on. But you're there, you're embracing it, you're taking on moments and engaging and adding that to the story. And it's, like making the players who could be in those places part of the entire experience and part of the universe and threading their history. And it might not even be a player. It could be just, oh, I'm a Lion Clan guy, and there's a Lion Clan guy at the, in the final right now. I am so much more invested than if I was, to borrow from Magic, if I was a blue deck player and there's a blue deck in the finale. What does that mean? That means nothing. That means there's nebulous. It's nothing. But this is something that you've created, this environment where people can engage. And it's like, if perhaps the Lion Clan player plays a champion or plays a ninja that's in this other guy's deck, and he feels like that is his deck is part of this experience.
That's exactly right. We allowed, not even, I mean, yeah, we'd allowed, but that was our goal, was to make the players feel part of the experience. And we had no idea the actual effect. It actually was stronger than we thought it would be, the effect of it. And that's great. That's like I said, somebody comes up and says, hey, John, let me show you my Scorpion Clan tattoo.
And absolutely amazing. And it's also shocking. It's a game that against all odds, obviously, had some fantastic minds behind it, yourself included, and John and Dave and Matt and everything like that. Obviously, fantastic minds behind it, but it was really the players that helped it endure. It could have just been another game, like it was like a Shadow Fist or like a Highlander CCG or something like that. But because the players were so embraced with it, it lasted 20 years. Like it lasted 20 years and then continues to live on. That world continues to live on to this day in a different medium, of course, with a different company who owns it and stuff now. But it's absolutely fascinating to see that the passion that game invoked sort of drove it so far, and made it so enduring all this time. Now, we've been talking about these sort of tournament stories, and there is obviously one that stands above the rest. We mentioned it before, and that is, the iconic Day of Thunder, the sort of climax of the initial first clan war arc of Legend of the Five Rings. I want you to tell me everything you can about your memories of that day, because you had a really big influence on the community. That is basically like, the pinch point of all Legend of the Five Rings history. Tell me about what you remember about that day, what you remember about that tournament, what you remember about, the aftermath of the victory and everything after that.
It was huge. It was all 4 days. The Gen Con lasted for 4 days. The tournament lasted for 4 days. It was over on Sunday. And it was emotionally draining. It really was, because it was, for the first couple days, it was like, this is the end of our story. This is, all the work that we put into this, it's coming to climax now. And it was almost sunk.
How so?
Because, like I said, I was called into a meeting, and there's a little room, and the WotC person, I'm not going to mention any names, but the WotC person that was there told me, we are extending the game. And I said, you have just made me a liar. You have all of those fans out there who have clan tattoos, who came in costume, who spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because we promised them that this would be a complete set and it would be done. And now I'm going to have to go out there, and you're going to make this announcement, and people are going to come and ask me, you have put me in the position of having to defend your decision. And when they do, I will tell them I was lied to too. And I almost quit. I'll be completely honest with you. I was like, you know what? Find someone else to tell this story. Because how can anyone trust me now? They spent 2 years, looking at me and looking at Dave and going, these are the guys that are, doing this thing. And now you've undercut all of my, like, you just cut my heels out. So, that close, but I really felt like I owed it to the players to finish the thing that I started. So I finished it, and we went out and we did the thing. Now, the story about the two Naga players, totally true. The story of players wearing clan shirts, and one of the factions that could win the game was the evil faction, was the Fulang Shadowlands faction. And we told them, I said, if the Shadowlands deck wins this tournament, it is 1,000 years of darkness, because that's the story of evil winning. And of course, the subsequent story would be 1,000 years later, right? Fitting my Rokugan 2000 plan, what it would essentially set up, what that would look like and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, and there was a ton of stuff going on, and I remember Zen Fawkes.
Yes, he's a legendary figure in the fandom of L5R. Wrote a lot of sort of articles and was very active on early internet.
When I met him, he was getting his PhD, and it involved crabs, because he's the Crab Clan scholar.
That sentence could be interpreted.
So I remember one of the sweetest things anyone said to me ever was, we were at the Day of Thunder, like the last game. It was the last game with the crane and the lion. And Dr. Zen was standing next to me, and I was choking up Dave Williams was openly crying. John Zinzer was crying. Like there are people in the crowd who were, like, because it's this 2-year thing. We put so much time and effort and love into it. You just can't help but get emotional about it. And Dr. Zen said, you did a great thing here, Mr. Wick. And I said, well, yeah, but Dave Williams is responsible for the mechanics that make everything work, and and Matt Wilson was responsible for the art direction and making it all look pretty, and and so it's a collaborative thing. And Dr. Zen said the sweetest thing to me ever. He said, "John, nobody is crying because the archery mechanic works."
And that's one of the things that sort of inspired those players, right? Like, it wasn't a connection by the fact that there was 4 provinces or whatever. It wasn't a connection that there was all these amazing techniques and ways that you could win the game 3 different ways and stuff like that, which we didn't even talk about how that affects your storytelling. But that's the thing. It's like there is such an immersion from the players for your story. And I 100% agree with Dr. Zen in that particular instance.
But so as it came about, there was a moment whenever a clan was eliminated from the tournament, the last deck of that clan had lost. I held up an envelope that had the ending of the story if that clan had won, and I tore it up. And which that ending will never happen. And to this day, I've never revealed what those endings are, and I never will. It's because the mystery is more fun than knowing, right? But so every time we tore up thing, when it came time when the last Shadowlands deck lost, there was a huge crowd, because they wanted to see when it was no longer possible for the Shadowlands to win.
They were the heel.
Yep, yeah, and they are heels. You're invoking a certain lingo, my friend. Do not get me distracted by pro wrestling.
That's my fault. I'll take that one.
All right, so and when the deck lost and I tore up the envelope, there was this breathtaking, ear-shattering cheer of the evil isn't going to win, regardless of anything else. Evil is not going to win. And that was great. And then the last game, I don't know what you've heard about the last game, but there's some public stuff that happened about the last game, and there's some private stuff that happened about the last game. The thing that I can talk about with certainty is that the 2 players who were a Lion Clan player and a Crane Clan player came to me and said, "Is there any way that we can have a co-victory? Because we don't know what you've written, but we want to make sure that Fu Lang does not win. And we are willing to be co-winners if Fu Lang and the Shadowlands do not win." And I was like, "You guys," right? And so I went to to WotC, and I was like, "Hey, we can do something that no tournament can do, right? Magic can't do this. Like Pokemon can't do this. There is no collectible card game that can do this. We will go down in history as the game where the 2 players agreed not to win, to actually share a victory for the story." And WotC said, "One of them has to win."
But we know that's not what ended up happening. So tell us what ended up persevering with you guys. Tell me exactly what.
Well, then there's something that happened behind the scenes. Now, I have only been told about this happening, but I've been told by people who were there and it happened to them. I was told that a certain person, again, whose name I won't mention, came to them privately and offered them something. I don't know what it was, whether it was cash or prizes or whatever. Offered them something after they won, to take off their clan shirt and wear a Shadowlands shirt under it. and say, I am really working for Fulang and Fulang wins. Now, to me, that I went to WotC and said, hey, the players want to do this thing. I was very open about it. I was like, hey, let's, blah, blah, blah. And I came to them and, because that's the responsible thing to do. And the fact that they did that behind my back, did not tell me about it, and put me in a position where I would have to tell the end of the story that, again, I already promised would not happen. I was like, the Shadowlands are out of the game. Evil cannot win. I promised people, I said, there is no twist. There is no twist ending where the Shadowlands wins. And I promised it all weekend. And then this person from WotC went to each of the players and tried to bribe them into essentially undermining my authority or my credibility again. And the two players came to me because they had talked to each other, came to me and said, this person offered us stuff to do this.
And what was your reaction?
Yeah, it was a real betrayal. And so they did the game. That person was watching very closely because they wanted to see if one of them would do it. But what they did not know was that the two players came to me and said, John, we would never do that. What we want to do is we will play until it is clear that one of us is about to win. And then we will shake hands and end the game. And one of us will clearly be the winner. But we will not make the last move. And again, I'm like, what other tournament did golf tournaments don't end this way? Right? No tournament ends this way, where the players come to the people running the tournament and saying, we don't want to win. Right? So I was like, okay, that, as far as I'm concerned, you're covered. And I did not go to WotC and go, okay, they're going to do this. Because, I don't know if I can swear on your show, but fuck them.
Yeah.
So they did that. They played until the very end. And then it was clear that the Lion Clan player was going to win. And he stopped and he extended his hand. And the Crane Clan player shook his hand. And that put me in the position, because I had known about it before they started playing. But all through that game, I was thinking, okay, I cannot use the Lion Clan ending. I can't use the Crane Clan ending. I have to come up with a completely different ending on the spot. A 2-year story arc. I have to come up with an ending on the spot.
Thank God you took those improv classes.
Yeah, it's a good thing I took those improv classes. And that's what I did. The ending of the story was that the two remaining clan champions fought together and defeated Fulang.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was it. That was the story that I came up with on the spot.
It's an absolute amazing legend in the Legend of the Five Rings, to use the word again, canon. And like in collectible card game canon, it's an absolute fantastic moment. And it's one of the, honestly, I'm going to speak for myself here, is one of the moments that in collectible card game history that really gravitates my focus. There's nothing that's happened before that like it. There's nothing that's happened even remotely close that anybody's ever given up because they wanted to learn more about the story in the most high stakes tournament. Like, this just obviously shows that how much track you laid for the experience, the user experience, the player experience in the time, in that short 2-year period. You had people with tattoos, you had people cosplaying, you had people, literally willing to give up their own pride for a game. Absolutely amazing. And there's nothing else like it. There is nothing else like it in the collectible game space ever.
I don't think there ever will be again, because it's already been done. Anything that happens will be compared to that. Right. And maybe, there's, I have a lot of respect and admiration for other people and other storytellers and other game designers. Maybe it'll happen again. Maybe that bottle lightning will get caught, again. And, and if it does, that's great. That's great. I will be there as a fan going, well done, excellent, right? We'll see. We'll see if it happens again.
We'll see. I know there's games like, it's not strictly collectible, but there's games like SoulForge Fusion that are intending to use the same model again, do like storyline tournaments and stuff like that. But that is a wholly different thing entirely. And I don't think that they could capture that sort of, the sort of the inspiration and the emotion that the clans sort of encaptured in that moment in 1997, the pre-internet era, where it was like there was a sense of camaraderie just through what cards you decided to put in your deck. Nothing else exists like it.
And I think an important element of it was the punk rock do-it-yourself that we brought to it.
The grassroots, yeah.
Yeah, and what's more is the once WotC took the game over, everything started being less fun. Because they were like, well, because they wanted their thumbprints on it. And that's one of the reasons that I left the game. Other than I had been doing samurai stuff for 7 years and I was done.
Tell me about that then. Like, tell me about what happened after the Day of Thunder for you as far as L5R goes, because you do eventually step away from it. Tell me about what your experience is as sort of the person who has sort of crafted or been, one of the major collaborator for crafting this world, because other people wrote stories and stuff like that and other people contributed, but you were sort of like the checkpoint for all of that. Tell me about how it felt moving on from that after the Day of Thunder, after that first 2 years, that promised, we talked about it before, that promised like the card game that will end. After that ending comes, you guys go on to do something like Scorpion Clan Coup, which is a prequel. Tell me about your experiences like after that 1997 Gen Con moment.
It was a lot less fun. It wasn't us in a small office in Ontario, California, going, wouldn't it be cool if, right? Because that was always our gauge. It was like, would it be cool if we did this? Yes. Okay, then let's do that. And that was the limit of the conversation. It was if I could walk into John Zinser's office. I remember when we were talking about Legend of the Burning Sands, which happened later, right? And I walked into John Zinser's office, or we were actually talking about something completely different. And because John, AEG was offered the opportunity to do Rifts Atlantis. And John brought me in the office and he was like, okay, John, make Rifts Atlantis cool. And I was like, it's not. and then I went, but you know what is cool? Rifts Arabian Nights is cool. And I said, and I was like, it's got this. And then I said, and it has sorcerers who remove their hearts and hide them so they can live forever. And John Zinser stood up in his chair and he went, we are doing that. We are doing that. Right. So there's this real informal, like, trust of, okay, we're going to do a cool thing. Let me pitch this by you, and we really had to, we really didn't. Because a lot of us were on such the same wavelength. We could go, I want to do this. And other people go, that's cool. Right. And once WotC had gotten hold of it, the focus was on, is the game balanced? Is, and all this other nonsense, which doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's like they weren't interested in what was cool. They were interested in, and they wanted a real firm hold on the story. So story tournaments became much more, they were less of me going around and listening to things and more of, we know the story we want to tell. And I was like, this is not for me.
Yeah, I understand that completely. And obviously it was bringing that expertise that they knew, the sort of the things we've alluded to so far, where it's like, all right, well, if the game is balanced, who cares what the story is? Only, I think Voices of the Coast at one point in the last sort of 20 years issued the fact that less than 10% of their fans have any engagement with the story. That might have changed a little bit now since then, but
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly, because it didn't feel like it had the gravitas that, say, something like Legend of the Five Rings did.
I mean, and frankly, I know from conversations that were had at WotC that the people who are running Magic resented that they came to them and said, make the game more like L5R. They resented it. And I would resent it too, frankly. Someone came to me and told me how to do my game. Screw you. My game's successful. Why do I need to have marketing come in and tell me, well, people really like pandas this month. Okay, fine. Yeah, you go and you do your panda thing. I'm going to keep doing samurai. We clearly need a panda clan.
Well, nobody in L5R didn't need a focus group before that. It never needed one after. But obviously, once that sort of corporate takes hold, they sort of start to reshape it in the model that, they had become expectant to sort of produce.
I didn't like it after that. And I stopped paying attention after that, honestly. People come to me and they go, what do you think of the Spider Clan? I'm like, the what?
Exactly, because that came obviously after your time. I guess my question is, obviously, you were also somebody who was a shepherd for, first edition of the role playing game. How does this sort of timeline that we're talking about now marry up with the way that it impacts your perspective on the role playing game as well? Is it lockstep?
Well, the card game had a spirit to it that we wanted to transfer to the role playing game. And one of the things one of the things that the role playing game was supposed to do was make you feel like you're part of the clan. So a lot of the mechanics were built, a lot of the character generation mechanics were built to make you feel like you're part of a larger thing. And so, like, for example, in the role playing game, one of the things you can buy with character points is an ancestor. There is, and in all the clan books, there are ancestors who have this story behind them, and then there's a mechanic that reflects that story. And you read through the Crab Clan book and you go, oh, I love this ancestor, and I get this. And if this is someone who is in my direct bloodline, this could be my grandfather or my grandmother, right? And then if I add this ancestor to my character sheet, I also get this mechanic. And that was like, Dave was very adamant. Like he was really happy when I was like, I agreed with him 100%. I was like, the mechanics, the flavor text and everything on the card should reflect the mechanics and address the mechanics in some way. And I would go into his office and say, I have this idea for this character, and I think that they do this. And he would go through his database of card effects and go, yeah, I got that covered. Right. And, and it went back and forth like that. He would come to me and go, I have this idea for a mechanic. And he's like, can you make a character around that? I was like, absolutely. Right. So the role-playing game, I feel one of the reasons that the role-playing game is so popular is because it, again, we took that idea of mechanics and story working together in a tag team, if you will, to hit the player as hard as they can, take it to 11, right? And I think that learning from Dave Williams for the card game also taught me a lot about building a role-playing game in the same way, and with those same principles. And yeah, it had a huge influence on the role-playing game.
It's absolutely amazing to hear you sort of recant that and sort of bring that sort of full experience full circle. Like, I mean, there's almost, I don't know if there is another example in history where there's been a collectible card game story that sort of got interweaved with a role-playing game, and then both of them have gone on to live their own independent but separate and exciting lives, and have been grown out of incredibly passionate people like you and Dave and obviously Matt as well. I do want to just, while L5R and your time with it is up against the ropes to continue the metaphors, let's sort of pivot away from L5R for a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about, after, you're sort of starting to drift away from L5R, you decide to sort of jump into this world that is 7th Sea, which is, an enduring property that you're still working on to this very day. Tell me a little bit about 7th Sea, just broadly about like sort of what inspired it. And then also if you can give me any perspective on, there was a collectible card game that seemed like, in my perspective, after I've taken a look at sort of what the role-playing game offers and what the card game offers, a very, very, very slim sliver of the world that you created. Talk to me about, what it was like sort of having your role-playing game turned into a collectible card game, and ultimately, how you felt about that product.
So the No Quarter, the card game, I loved. I loved the No Quarter card game. It was designed mainly by Dan Verson. And we in the office, Dan was a local person in LA, and we were big fans of Dan's game. He has games like Down in Flames and things like that. Very complementary to our own like philosophy of how things work. Because at the time, I mean, you can take a lot of board games from a particular country who I will not mention, but whose initials are Germany, where the mechanic seems like the theme of the game is just a trapping. And the mechanic is actually a math problem. It's not a game, it's a math problem where the skin on it is, whatever. It has nothing to do with it. Dan's games and other people's games since then. Dan's games, what you are doing feels like what you are doing in the game. And that was so important to us. So when Dave was super busy with Doomtown, which again used a deck of cards, used a hand of cards for a poker hand for resolutions, hey, it's a Western, that fits, right? We brought him on board because we really loved Dan's games. And so building that game was a lot of fun too. Mainly because a lot of new characters, and it was a ship-to-ship fighting game. And it's pirates, because pitching 7th Sea is easy. It's Magic Pirates.
At its simplest form, though. Like, I mean, obviously there was a lot more to 7th Sea than just Magic Pirates, though.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more to 7th Sea. It started off with my wife at the time, Jennifer, saying, I want you to make a William Blake role-playing game.
Not the Beretta guy.
Yeah, not the Beretta guy. The English painter and poet. I want you to make that. And I was like, and she was kind of like daring me, right? And at the time I was reading a book called The Last Sorcerer, which is a biography of Isaac Newton, and focusing not only on the physics stuff that he did, but also the fact that he was an alchemist, and he was deeply into alchemy, which probably killed him.
I did not know that.
And then a conversation I was having with somebody else in the office where we agreed that there can never be another pirate movie because Errol Flynn is dead. And we were wrong.
Obviously, Johnny Depp.
Obviously, yeah. And we were like, let's do and it started, 7th Sea started as just the Nation of Vodace, which is this Machiavellian gone mad a merchant princes. It's basically based on Italy, on that element. Oh, and the other element of it was that Jennifer and I had seen a movie that we loved. It's an average film that is better than it has a right to be, and it's called Dangerous Beauty, and it's about Veronica DeFranco. And we loved that movie. Jennifer loved it even more than I did. And we were sitting around and talking about, she wanted a magic system that was very visceral, that was like involved blood, and at the same time she was like, and the women in the DeFranco movie, there's a scene where one of them is wearing all black with this black shawl over her face and everything, and we like, I want that image in the game. I want that image in the game. And that all evolved into the Fate Witches of Vodace and having merchant princes, and the game became a game about feminism, which it still is. And all of this, and all of that eventually evolved into 7th Sea.
Okay. So look, tell me, okay, so it's an amazing world and people can still discover it via the second edition that you're currently still sort of putting out product for. But tell me a little bit, just very, very crib notes, like how, like, obviously the game sort of takes on a different thing when it comes to the collectible side of things. You obviously enjoyed it. Did you have any input on it? Was there any other thoughts that you had around about how the 7th Sea collectible card game sort of crafted itself out, especially considering you'd come off this completely different experience with Legend of the Five Rings?
Yeah, it really came down to Dan and I working together, going, okay, Dan's like, I need this kind of deck. And I was like, okay, well, let's make that this kind of ship. And Dan has a real good sense for these things. So a lot of times he was like, I need a deck, I need a game that I need a ship that has a lot of cannons. And he's like, because this ship is going to have a lot of cannons. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? You know, and then we would talk about it. And so it was a lot of like with Dave, it was a lot of, you know, collaboration of going back and forth and like, would it be cool if, you know, and that's how the original decks came about. And they also had characters that were from the role-playing game, because the role-playing in L5R, the card game came first and then the role-playing game. But for 7C, the role-playing game came first and then the card game came out. So seeing characters that the player that are in the game that the characters really liked in the game, that was a lot of fun.
Okay, so sort of that sort of, you know, to jump back a little bit, we sort of wrap up our time with AEG with 7C sort of coming out and sort of being a huge success in the in the sort of RPG space. Can you talk about your exit from AEG after, you know, after everything has sort of settled with those two particular properties, you know, Legend of the Five Rings and 7C?
Yeah, it was kind of like a sad divorce.
Oh, go on, tell me about that.
I mean, it was they were going in the company was going in a direction, I was going in another direction, and we were just making each other mad. And you know, and I take my half of the responsibility for that. And again, I see John Zinzer, and I see Dave Williams, and I see, you know, people, and we still communicate. You know, we're in different parts of the world now, but you know, we still communicate during Facebook. When I see them at cons, it's always very warm and very friendly, right? And I have nothing but admiration, respect, and love for the people who help, you know, who we all work together to make L5R and 7C.
All right, so that sort of wraps up your time with collectible card games, and I do want to sort of just say, obviously, you know, your contributions, whether they're, you know, just those stories, like like a lot of people like obviously focus on collectible card game mechanics and the legacy of that, but you were sort of the shepherd of collectible card game story. You know, we discussed it during this episode. There is nothing like L5R, and no collectible card game has achieved it so far. But every collectible card game that comes out from now to the future should aim to achieve what you achieved. You are the high watermark for storytelling with collectible card games. And for that, as a historian of the genre, I just want to say thank you very much.
You're very. I did not do it alone, but thank you very much.
So I do have a couple more questions. That is from the community, things that people have asked about, you know, that they were curious about when it comes to sort of collectible card games as a whole. So okay, so let's jump in because there's a couple of things. First of all, there's a couple of people I want to call out. The first person I want to call out who actually sent me a bunch of messages and stuff like that is Ramon Pina. He just gave me some great advice about this episode. He gave me some great context and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm not indoctrinated into the entire depth of the L5R story, but he certainly helped me out with some of the background and stuff like that. So I do want to say thank you very much, Ramon. And somebody else I want to just call out as well is Toby Braden Johnson. He just wanted to let you know that your story for Legend of the Five Rings and the Clan Wars saga kept him enraptured, and it still does to this day. He just wants to say thank you so much for all the happiness and things that, you know, the story and the community has brought from him and from your, you know, sort of your pen.
As always, I'm kind of stunned that that the little game that we worked on, people still remember. It's very flattering that people still remember, and thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah, that little office in California has sort of spurned out and sort of affected so many sort of minds and sort of improved so many lives and helped so many people through so many gaming experiences. I love it so much. So I do want to ask, my first real community question comes from Matthew Phillips. He asks, with 25 years sort of plus at this point almost, well, yeah, 27 years, I guess. Years sort of between sort of the inception of L5R and anything like that. Is there anything that you would like? Can you point to anything that you would have done entirely differently?
Um, yeah, I don't know how to say this. I lament the fact that Matt Wilson and I are not friends, and I would have done that differently.
Okay, so this is stepping away from the story and talking about your relationship with him. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, why do you think that you guys aren't friends at the moment?
Uh, I mean, we haven't reached out to each other at all, and I think that both of us, you know, to take my share of the blame, I think that we both could have handled our relationship differently. I think that the same thing happened to us that happened to like Lennon and McCartney and other creative individuals who are partners, and then as you grow differently. And it's just like, you know, it's just like a relationship. It's like any other relationship where you grow in different directions, and you know, and then it's sad thing happens and you don't talk to each other anymore. But as opposed to story stuff I would have done differently. Let's see. Not really, actually. Now that I think about it, I mean, I'm so happy with all of the happy accidents that happened. Like almost like we had an outline of the story, but so many things, accidental things happened that led to that. If we had not gone to see as an office, if we had not gone to see the movie Face Off, there would not be a Mantis Clan.
Wow. So Face Off, the Nicolas Cage, John Travolta movie, is the inspiration for the Mantis Clan. Just quickly, can we unpack that? Just, I would love to know the inspiration there.
Okay, so there was a meeting. It was one of the first meetings we had after WotC had purchased the game, and they're like, "We need more clans." And Dave and I mean, Dave, being smart and political, he was like, "Well, we'll see what we can do." And me, being me, I'm like, "No, no." And I went, "What?" You know, and the conversation essentially went like, well, I was like, all the niches are taken in the game. All of the, you know, another element, by the way, is a sidetrack. Another element, another game that highly influenced L5R was the Dune board game that recently got re-released. Dave Williams and I are huge fans of that game. And essentially, we took the philosophy of there are 7 rules and there are 7 clans, and every clan breaks a rule.
Sort of like a Galactic, not Galactic Empires, Cosmic Encounter did the similar sort of thing.
Same designers who did Cosmic Encounters did the Dune board game. So I was like, all the slots are taken. And they went, well, let's make them really rich. And I went, you mean like the Crane clan? I said, okay, well, let's make them really sneaky. And I said, well, like the Scorpion clan. It's like, well, let's make them really strong. I said, like the Crab clan. And I was literally told, fuck you, you're the writer, you figure it out. And I will never forget that. I'll never forget that. And I'm like, I am trying to be, you know, a custodian of this thing that we built, and you just want to make money. You know, and from my point of view, I'm okay with making money. I'm fine with making money. But when your goal is to make money, and then things start going wrong, because you'll just chase the money, and you know, whatever. When you make something great and money comes from it, that's when you get good stuff. But yeah, I know there are Menace Clan fans. I heart you. I heart my Menace Clan fans who get Menace Clan tattoos and everything. So like that day, the office went, and I was angry. I was really angry. And we went to go see the John Woo movie, Face Off. And when we got back, John Zinser turned to me and he was like, Castor Troy, the Nicolas Cage character, Castor Troy has to be the champion of the Mantis Clan. And because he's cool. He's scary and cool. And I mean, you mean he's a sociopath? And he's like, yeah. And I went, okay, I can work with that. I can do that. I can make the Manus Clan champion think that he's a god. And that's where the Manus Clan came from. And I think it's one of the, despite the fact that I wish there was only the 7 clans. At what I really wish is there were the 7 clans and the story is about the 7 clans and that's it. Because all the clans that came after that just they don't have the same juice that the 7 clans do. And I love them, and I made them as good as I could. And there are parts of them that I adore, like Yamamoto, the champion of the Manus Clan. I love him. He is such a great character because he thinks he's a god, and now is his time. I mean, that is a great character to write for. So making the whole Manus Clan around that. So I wish that we could just keep to the 7 clans. It's a long answer to your simple question. But at the same time, I'm glad that people are fans of the things that aren't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time, it gave people an opportunity to grow and engage in the game in different ways that they hadn't done for so long before. I do want to just circle back to something you said there. Obviously, there is something I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about that statement you just made. Matthew Wilson and yourself. You guys obviously separated on bad terms by the sounds of it. Can you unpack why the relationship went that way? And obviously, the community is curious. I have to put this forward. There is a specific art of Kachiko that has a message dedicated to yourself from Matt as the artist of the card. Can you talk to not only your relationship, what led to that, and what the card means to you now?
So first of all, I don't want to tell one side of a story. That's not fair to Matt.
It's not fair to Matt, but this is your side of the story. Let me just flagpole that with saying this is your side of the story. So maybe I'll have Matt on one day and I'll talk to him about it. But this is your chance to talk to that.
So I'll tell you a story, but without like going into too much details. So, the cards came in, and it was the Kachiko card and the cover of the Dragon book, and on them they had kanji on them, and I looked at them and I went, that means something. And at the time, I was told, no, they don't. We checked. And so I took photocopies of them and I took them to my friend who is Japanese and speaks Japanese and reads katakana and reads, all the other stuff. And I said, what do these mean? And he said, oh, the one on the dragon is AEG has no honor. And the one on the Kachiko card is John Wick sucks ass. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, okay. And then I didn't tell anybody. Because I went and I said, hey, 2 times. I went, I think there is something written on these cards. And they went, no, we checked. And I said, who did you check with? And they said, experts. And I said, okay. And then I didn't say anything. And then a few months went by. The cards came out. Day of Thunder, that's when those cards came out. The Dragon Clan book came out. And I remember I was in my office and I was hanging up a picture. And I was on a ladder, a little step ladder, and I had a hammer and I was hammering nails. And Dave C., one of the co-owners of AEG, said, hey, John, we want to talk to you. And I said, okay. I don't know what it's about. I have ADHD, so I automatically assume whenever someone in authority wants to talk to me that it's bad. So I got down and he said, put down the hammer. And I was like, oh. So we went to the office and I was given a very sincere apology by people that there was indeed something written on the cards and I was right. And I went, great. How are you going to make this right? And there was a conversation. And from that conversation, 7th Sea happened. And that's about as much as I'm willing to talk about without,
No, well, I mean, that's fair. That's entirely fair. Do you have any context that you would be willing to share around why those cards were embraced with those words?
You mean why Matt put them in the pictures? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to talk for Matt. I think it's unfair to talk for Matt.
I cannot be grateful enough that you've spoken to it as much as you have already. So back to the community questions, rather than me splitting the conversation apart. Aaron F, absolute great fan. He's listened to the show a bunch. Which character stories did you enjoy writing the most, more than others, and what were those? Like, did you have any sort of pet stories you love writing? I mean, I assume Kachiko might be amongst those.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the obvious answer. Kachiko is I like to call myself a method writer, in that, you know, I get deeply, again, it's part of my ADHD thing. I become deeply involved with my characters. I have a relationship with my characters, and I feel kind of an obligation to them to tell a story that is true to them, and, you know, even if bad things happen to them. And I feel like the bad things that happen to them should be at least partially of their own actions. And Kachiko's story is really about a woman who has in her culture has a justified reason for revenge, has it and is seeking it, and there is a point at which, like, and she is successful. She is successful to the point where the empire could be destroyed, which is what her goal is to destroy the empire. But then once she reaches that point, has the epiphany, has that third act epiphany of, holy shit, I'm the villain. I am the cause of all of this. And the consequences of getting that revenge are too great. And then has that change, right? That was a lot of fun to write. And because I am obsessed with revenge stories. I love revenge. I think it's a fantastic tool for storytelling.
If it wasn't for Kachiko, was there another particular clan or something like that you had an affection for?
Yeah, I mean, there was Hitomi's story of who is kind of parallel to Kachiko's story, but goes in a very different dark direction. Because I wanted to have one path that was the holy shit, revenge can ruin you, and then the other one, which is holy shit, revenge can ruin you. And then she was fun writing. Like I said, writing Yoritomo was really fun because he's just such, I mean, we talk about going to 11. That guy, he doesn't know that the volume knob turns the other direction. He just keeps turning it, right? He's fun. Ginoa, who is a Ronin, starts off as a Ronin in the thing. I modeled after Toshiro Mifune.
The classic Kurosawa actor, Seven Samurai, of course.
Classic Kurosawa actor. He is Senjuro. I modeled him after Senjuro. He's not Senjuro. He's actually different. But yeah, again, another revenge story. But one of the stories that was really fun, again, happened by accident. There is a card in the base set because we needed a card that was, it was a mechanical necessity. And it was a personality card that was free. Personality card that you could bring out regardless of your condition in the game. And Dave was like, we have to put this in the game. And his name is Toku.
Oh, yes.
And Toku was this little 0-1 card. He really didn't have anything behind him. He's just, he's a mechanical necessity and all that. And as it turns out, he would show up in every deck because he's the mechanical, like, if you got nothing else, you can bring out Toku, right? And he would, like, players would put shit on him. They would give him blood swords. They would give him, like, all this kind of stuff, right? And pretty soon, there's, and harkening back to the Civil War thing again, in Ken Burns' Civil War, there are two soldiers, one in the north and one in the south, who, as the documentary says, seem to have been everywhere. They just seem to be at all the battles. And I was like, Toku, talking to him, you seem like you're that guy.
He's going to be there. He's going to be there.
He's got to be there. And after the Day of Thunder, back in LA, we did another story tournament, which was the Casualty tournament, which is all of these unaligned and otherwise obscure characters. And whenever a player won one of the tournaments, they could pick one of the characters to die. They died in the war. And Toku was on that list. And I put him there as a dare.
Who dares kill? Who chooses Toku?
Who chooses Toku? And as it turned out, like people would come up and I remember specifically one guy come out and he had his finger on the card and he looked at me and he went, can't do it.
So we got one last community question from Rob Martis, and he just wants to know if you could have had complete control over the circumstances and you could only choose one. You couldn't have chosen the amazing outcome that we talked about in this episode. Who would you have chosen to win the Day of Thunder from your own preference?
Oh, clearly the Scorpion Clan. Without hesitation. That's because I'm loyal. And that's the most important virtue.
Absolutely. And it's perfect theme for the particular clan and everything like that.
I mean, I think it would have been very interesting to not that I'm going to tell you, but clearly the ending has something to do with Kochko. And that ending would have been fun. I mean, all of them would have been fun, but that one it would have been my favorite. And because I think narratively the story begins with her and it ends with her, right? Narratively, it would have felt the most complete. But yeah, that's the one that I would have picked.
Well, I do want to speak to that for a second, because there was sort of like a move away, once you left, a move away from Kachiko.
I mean, that's and to be honest, that's fine. My story is Kachiko's story. We should tell different stories with different characters. It's a whole empire full of people. And, Rhys Osby, took over the story after I left. I picked her. It's not like, it was taken from me. I was like, Rhee is the best choice to do this. And bless her heart, that's a Southern phrase that means something differently. So I shouldn't use that phrase. What I'm going to say is I lament that Rhee had to deal with WotC. That I am certain that she would have told a different story if WotC was not in charge.
Well, she is obviously a legendary storyteller, a fantastic roleplay creator and stuff like that, and she shepherded that story for years after you left, and I think that she deserves a complete
and did an excellent job.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I was going to say. She deserves complete credit for that, and I think that people should look into her work. Speaking to your work as well, and speaking to the start of the story, I have to say I revisited. Was it Long Knives? Is that really early Kachiko story?
Oh yeah,
I revisited that this week, and I suggest if anybody, even if you aren't an L5R fan, even if you don't know anything about it, just go and read that story and tell me afterward that you didn't emotionally connect to everybody in it. Whether it's the Emperor, whether it's Kachiko, whether it's even the two guards that were standing guard over the Emperor. It is a beautifully written story. It's only, maybe 1,000 words, maybe a little bit over that at most, but I recommend it. It will be linked in the description below. Anyway, so to speak to the last of it, that is sort of it for the episode. I appreciate all your time and everything like that, and I appreciate you answering some of the community questions with such valor and so earnestly the way that you did. But there is one thing we got to do before we get out of here, and that's a little bit fun. It is Kraken questions.
Release the Kraken.
Uh-oh.
Kraken questions in this game. All you have to do is tell me a color of these booster packs. All I do is I rip it open, I answer you the 3 common silly questions and the 1 rare game design question. You tell me which color you would prefer of the 3 sitting here, and we'll see what's inside.
Well, clearly red is the correct color.
I mean, depending on what part of the world you live in, a lot of people believe that.
They're correct.
All right, so our first common question. Oh, okay, this is an interesting one. And you mentioned what you've been up to at the beginning of the episode. What video game have you ever spent the most time playing?
Oh, Borderlands 2.
Oh yeah.
I'm a huge Borderlands fan. I love, it's the only like shooter game that I like because the guns are so ridiculous.
There's guns that make guns or fire guns.
Guns that make guns, yeah.
It's crazy. All right, so Kraken questions number 2, and this is you must have chosen this pack out of fate because this is crazy, and I might even add something to the rider here. If you could master one of the 4 elements, a la bending, which element would you choose? If it was fire, water, earth, or air?
Fire.
Yeah. Okay. And why is that?
Because it's fire. It is the tool that can hurt you.
It is so, well, I mean, yeah, definitely it is a magic.
It's the element of intelligence. It's why we are, because we cooked meat, we made tools, we, fire.
It is definitely yeah, it has given us so much, like from everything from energy to life in itself. It is definitely an important element in it all. All right, so last common question. It's a rather simple one. Would you rather be able to fly or be super fast on the ground? Discuss.
Fly.
Okay, and why is that?
Because I've been close to flying.
Unpack that.
Well, through various like activities,
like skydiving or something.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And there is nothing in the world like going through like with nothing. Like it's just you, right? So I've been on gliders and all that kind of stuff, and flying is just it feels so good. It's like being on a roller coaster with no tracks.
Yeah. Well, I just saw today, I was at a reception office and they had like a, Instagram-y type videos playing, and there was just people like on one of those giant wind tunnels where you could sort of just basically skydive from the ground, and it's surrounded by a giant trampoline. Absolutely amazing stuff that they can do on that, so those sort of things. I would love to try that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
So the last rare question, and in fact, considering what you told me about your very first article with AEG, I cannot wait to hear this answer. Because you must be psychic to choose that red pack. Because my question is, the rare question in the booster pack is, what is your favorite game that uses dice?
That I didn't write?
That you didn't write. Yes, let's add that rider.
All right, my favorite game that I didn't write. Pendragon.
Tell me why Pendragon stands out amongst those.
So Pendragon for me was the first role-playing game that really took that idea that if a meme or if a meme or a trope or whatever exists in the thing that you're adapting, that you're trying to mimic, those things should be mechanics. So, and I mean, nowadays it's like, well, duh, yeah. But back in 1980, whatever, that's not true. That's not what people were doing. They were trying to make systems that were realistic. That was the goal. It was realism. Which system, GURPS or Champions, is more realistic? I'm like, one of them is meant to emulate superhero combat, so clearly not that one, right? But Pendragon, you play a knight, and in the time of King Arthur, your goal is to become a knight of the Round Table. So there's a goal in the game, right? And your personality traits are mechanics on the sheet. So, and their choices: are you chaste or lustful? Are you vengeful or just? Are you, and there's these two things, and it's right there on your sheet, and it tells you who your character is. And like, if anything else, all role-playing games should just pluck that out and put it on their character sheet.
Well, it's so much more interesting than the alignment charts or something like that is, so nebulous.
Don't get me started on alignment. And the other thing is that there's a trope in Arthurian literature of a knight going mad with passion, throwing their armor off and running naked into the woods and disappearing for a year, right? That's a mechanic. That's in the game, right? And the other, the thing that I really love is that in the game, you're rolling a d20 under a number. So if you have a sword skill of 17, you're trying to roll 17 or less on a d20. So, but once you get your skill to 20, you can no longer fail.
You're a made man.
And once you get your skill above 20, then you start getting into legendary, right? And like if you have a skill of 25, you add 5 to your whatever you roll, and if your roll is 20 or higher, you crit.
That is critical, to say the least.
Right? And what's more, there's another element of the game called glory, which is whenever you do something that lends to your story, you get glory points. And glory in the game makes you more powerful. So the more that people know about you, the more the bards write about you, the more that people talk about you, the more powerful your character is. And that's great. That's great. You can face Lancelot in a joust and lose and gain glory because you jousted Lancelot as part of your story. Queen Guinevere gave you a glance.
Glory.
And it has rules for romance and like all of this stuff.
So let me ask you this question then. Have you created your Pendragon yet?
That's a really good question. Probably not. I mean, there's things I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of the L5R role-playing game. Okay. If I were to do it today, I would do it differently. Not really differently. Actually, I did. For my Patreon subscribers, which is patreon.com John Wick.
Link in the description.
I gave them a game called Gorin no Sho, which is a Miyamoto Musashi role-playing game, which is essentially the L5R first edition system, but with like 21st century John Wick, how game systems work.
Right. Modern design.
Yeah, with modern design. And it's essentially like version 1.5. And it's very simple. It doesn't invoke any L5R stuff at all. It doesn't even have Shugenja, right? It's just no L5R words at all. It's a Japanese game that uses a system that is like first edition, but feels more like a true second edition. So that was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of all the stuff I've done. Houses of the Blooded, I think, is really interesting.
It's iconic.
It's the what if the whole world was the Scorpion Clan.
No wonder you wrote it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, all of that stuff is going to be linked in the description as well. And I cannot express how grateful I am for this conversation, because as a collectible games, and I'm using heavy quotation marks here, historian, your influence will never be, I don't know if it'll ever be rivaled as far as narrative in a collectible card game goes. Obviously, we discussed it in the episode, maybe there'll be another one that comes along, but it will always be seen as like, oh, this is the thing that L5R does. As Soulforge Fusion pushes forward with their story tournaments in the future, there is no way it's not going to be compared to what you had achieved, 25 years ago at this point. Thank you so much, John, for joining me. Before we get out of here, tell me about what you're up to now. Is there anything that I can direct my listeners to, or anything that you think people should know about that you're into at the moment?
So I'm working at Chaosium, who are the fine makers of Call of Cthulhu, Pendragon, RuneQuest, and now 7th Sea. The 7th Sea Kickstarter finally is almost finished. We're going to be sending the text for the last book to the backers this week, I think. It's very, 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 very soon. At least I sent the text to the person who updates the website. So there we go. And as far as the other stuff that I'm doing, I have a Patreon.
Yep. And what do people get from your Patreon?
Okay, so I did Gorin no Sho, which was my Japanese role-playing game. I recently, for Halloween, I released a game called Fear, which is a really dark, dire horror role-playing game. Really, really dark.
I believe you.
I've also when I started the Patreon, I was going to do essentially a gaming magazine that had different stuff in it. There's like 8 issues of it up there that if you join the Patreon, you get everything that I've ever done. You get all the stuff. So for $2.99, you can jump on the website. You can jump on the Patreon, download a couple hundred pages of stuff, role-playing games, play dirty articles, short stories, all this kind of stuff. And then, and every month I'm trying, starting in September, I'm going to try every month to put something up. And so every month you get a cool thing.
That's awesome. So obviously, people can connect with you. Obviously, a lot of the people who have discovered my show, obviously, are role players as well. And I think your work, we didn't really even talk about it, but Play Dirty is an absolute great tome for GMs to sort of change their perspective on, what being a GM can mean. Like you said, challenge your players, listen to your players and stuff like that. So I do recommend anybody out there who's interested in being a storyteller in this gaming space, go check out John's Patreon. Go check out some of the links in the description. We're going to link all that sort of stuff, all the new Chaosium stuff as well. That's about it from us. I do appreciate you guys joining us. And I obviously, of course, appreciate John. So it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye from you, John.
Bye.
Catch you later, my friend. Until next time, remember, keep shuffling. And there you have it, our episode with John Wick. What an amazing storyteller he is. And if you're interested in any of the stuff that he mentioned at the end there, be sure to check the description or show notes of this episode, because you're going to find them linked down there. Now, as for me, you can find me linked in the description on social media, whether that's facebook.com/CCG History or twitter.com/CCG History, or some other outlets I might be exploring in the near future. So be sure to check out those links down there to see if there's anything that you might have missed. Also, remember the Booster Pack network that can be found on all social media, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Nothing on TikTok yet, coming soon. Perhaps Discord, coming soon. Just have a look in the description to see if that's been updated so far. But by all means, a special place where we can talk about trading card games, collectible card games, all that sort of stuff over the next couple of years. So please, wherever you're watching this or listening to this, subscribe, whether that's a podcatcher, whether that's on YouTube. Subscriptions from fans go a long way to helping us bring new information, new interviews, all that sort of stuff to the forefront. So please do that. All right, that's about it from me. Thank you so much for joining us again. And until next time, I've said it once, and I will say it again. Remember, keep shuffling.